At Nalehu Cemetery, on the southern end of Hawaii's Big Island, the water came through hard enough last weekend to open the ground. Graves were unearthed, not damaged, not flooded, opened. In the town just up the road, mud stacked up against houses to a depth of about 10 feet, which is the exact height of a basketball rim, and if you have ever stood under one and looked up, you already know what that means for a single-story home. 6 bridges in that district were destroyed or nearly destroyed. Sections of the highway that carries people to one of the only hospitals in the region collapsed into the water and washed away. And then, 7 days later, almost to the hour, a second tropical system arrived over the same slopes and began to rain. That is where the Big Island stands as I record this. Not at the beginning of a disaster, in the middle of one, being asked to absorb a second round of the same hazard with none of its defenses restored. Hawaii County declared a local state of emergency on the 22nd of August. 6 shelters opened. 2 of them are running on generator power because the electricity in that part of the island still has not come back and, in some communities, is not expected to come back until the 8th of September. If you follow the way the planet behaves under pressure, subscribe before we go further, because we track this island every week and the next 24 hours on it are going to matter. Here is what I want to do in the next few minutes. First, tell you what Tropical Storm Moke is and what it is not, because a lot of what is circulating online right now is wrong in a way that makes the story sound bigger and understand the story less. Second, explain why a storm that never comes ashore and never becomes a hurricane and stays hundreds of miles offshore is still a serious threat to this specific island in this specific week. And third, there is something else happening on the Big Island right now at the same time that most of the mainland coverage has skipped over entirely, and the county has already written an emergency plan for it. That one is worth waiting for. Start with the storm, because the storm is the easiest part. Moch is pronounced Mocha. It formed in the Central Pacific as a tropical depression, was upgraded to a tropical storm, and it has spent its entire life doing something that would normally be reassuring. It has been moving west, and it has been staying south. By early Sunday morning Hawaii time, the center was about 310 miles due south of Hilo, which is roughly the distance from Boston to Philadelphia. Maximum sustained winds were around 45 miles per hour, the speed you feel if you put your hand out the window of a car on a highway. By Sunday evening, those winds had eased to about 40. The minimum central pressure sat near 1,002 millibars, and for context, ordinary sea level pressure on a calm day is around 1,013. So the core of this thing is barely a dent in the atmosphere. The center never touched land. It was never going to. Forecasters at the Central Pacific Hurricane Center said with high confidence that the system would stay below hurricane strength, running into a wall of dry mid-level air and southwesterly wind shear that would take it apart rather than build it up. By Monday, Moch is passing well south of the smaller islands. By Tuesday, forecasters expect it to lose its tropical structure entirely and become a post-tropical cyclone. Its field of tropical storm force wind, which reached out about 115 miles from the center at one point, had shrunk to something closer to 45 miles. No tropical storm watches were issued for any Hawaiian island. No warnings, no coastal watches, or warnings either. That was a deliberate call, and forecasters explained the reasoning openly. The storm is compact, and the strongest winds were always going to stay out at sea. The only tropical storm warning in the picture covered the open ocean beyond 40 nautical miles from the islands, stretching out to 240, including a slice of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument east of French Frigate Shoals. Water, not land. So by every measure that usually decides whether a storm is dangerous, Moch should have been a non-event. And instead, the county opened shelters, closed roads, moved a park and ride lot, tied down aircraft at 2 international airports, and declared an emergency. That gap between what the storm is and what the island is bracing for is the entire story, and it has nothing to do with the wind. It has to do with what the Big Island is made of and what happened to it last week. Under normal conditions, this island is one of the thirstiest surfaces in the Pacific. It is built out of young volcanic rock that is riddled with holes and cracks and old lava tubes, and rain that falls on it tends to vanish downward almost as fast as it lands. That is why Hawaii can take rainfall totals that would drown a mainland city and simply shrug. The island swallows. Right now, it cannot swallow. Every void underground is full. Every slope is holding as much water as the physics of soil allows it to hold. The channels and culverts that carry runoff to the sea are half choked with rock and vegetation and broken pieces of the last storm, and county crews have been working around the clock trying to clear them ahead of this one. When a surface has lost its capacity to take water in, the rain does not soak, it runs. And on an island where the terrain tilts from 13,000 feet down to the ocean in the space of a few dozen miles, running water accelerates. There is a second piece of geography that makes this worse, and it is the same piece that made last week catastrophic. Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea stand nearly 13,000 feet above the sea, higher than anything in the eastern two-thirds of the mainland United States. When moist tropical air moves toward them, it has nowhere to go but up. Rising air cools. Cooling air cannot hold its moisture, and the moisture comes out. That process does not require a storm center overhead. It only requires the storm to be close enough to aim wet air at the mountains. Moch, sitting a couple of hundred miles offshore, is close enough. And there is a second failure mode hiding inside a saturated slope, one that gets far less attention than flooding and kills more reliably. Soil holds itself together by friction. Grains of rock and volcanic ash press against each other, and that pressure is what keeps a steep hillside from becoming a moving object. Fill the spaces between those grains with water, and the water starts carrying some of the load. The grains stop pressing as hard against one another, friction drops, and at some point, on some slope, the amount of weight the hillside is supporting exceeds the amount of grip it has left, and the whole face lets go at once. That is why landslide risk does not peak while it is raining hardest. It peaks hours or even a day later once the water has worked its way deep into the slope. Officials on the island were warning about exactly that window after Lala, and those slopes never got the chance to drain before Moch's rain started arriving on top of them. Which is why the National Weather Service wrote something into the flood watch that is worth hearing in the original spirit. It will not take a significant amount of rain to cause flash flooding because of saturated ground from recent heavy rain. That is the whole hazard in one line. The threshold has moved. The amount of rain it takes to put water where it should not be has dropped, and nobody outside Hawaii is adjusting their mental model for that. Now, the part you need in order to understand why the threshold moved so far. Hurricane Lala made her closest approach on the 15th of August. She was a Category 1 hurricane with maximum sustained winds near 80 miles per hour, and her eye passed about 30 miles off South Point, the southern tip of the island. She never made landfall. The center of the eye never crossed the coastline, which means that by the strict definition used by forecasters, Hawaii was not hit. Look at what not being hit did. Rainfall estimates across the windward and southern slopes ran to more than 3 feet in places, with figures in the range of 30 to 40 inches reported, and one total as high as 43 inches. Over on Maui, Kapalua recorded around 48 inches across the weekend. 4 feet of water delivered from the sky. At the peak, rain was falling at 3 to 5 inches an hour, a rate that overwhelms every drainage system built by human beings, because nothing is designed for that. The Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency, which is the most severe flood alert in the American system and is used only when lives are in immediate danger, covering Naalehu, Pāhala, and Hawaiian Ocean View. 263 homes and 18 businesses were damaged or destroyed. Occupied houses were lifted off their foundations and carried. Mud buried properties to that 10-foot depth I mentioned at the start. 2 people were killed in the Kaʻū District, one of them a 90-year-old woman caught in floodwater, and another death connected to a falling tree. 6 bridges in Kaʻū were destroyed or almost destroyed. The mayor of Hawaii County used one word to describe the district: devastation. Parts of the Pāhala highway collapsed overnight, severing the road link to an area served by one of the only hospitals for miles. The island recorded what officials described as a record number of road closures. Statewide, more than 250,000 electricity customers lost power at the peak, and 4 independent power producers on the Big Island were knocked clean off the grid. A week later, on the morning of the 22nd of August, about 8,800 customers on Hawaii Island were still in the dark. Crews had restored around 2,500 the day before. And in the communities of Waiohinu, Naʻalehu, Punaluu, Pāhala, and Wood Valley, the utilities' estimate for full restoration extends to the 8th of September. 3 more weeks without power, in homes that already have mud in them, on roads that are already broken, on the day a second storm starts raining. And Lala was not finished with the state when she left the Big Island behind. Maui took a hit of its own, with Kapalaua's 4 feet of rain, and the mayor of Maui County warned before Moch arrived that after what his island had already absorbed, even light to moderate rain and wind could be enough to bring down trees, block roads, and knock out power again. 2 Big Island schools closed outright, Naʻalehu Elementary and Kaʻū High, along with Pāhala Elementary, some of them for most of a week, because the campuses were damaged and the roads to reach them were gone. Then the storm turned northwest and headed for a part of Hawaii almost nobody thinks about: the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, the chain of tiny reefs and atolls inside Papahanaumokuakea that stretches for more than 1,000 miles beyond the main islands, are normally shielded by water, so cool that hurricanes do not survive the trip. Lala survived it. She entered the monument's warning area with winds near 110 miles per hour, passing closest to Morrow Reef and Lisiansky Island, places that host seabird colonies and monk seal populations, and effectively no human infrastructure to warn. Major hurricanes reaching that far into the chain barely exist in the modern record, which goes back to the late 1940s. That is the ground Moch is falling on. The forecast numbers for Moch are, on paper, modest by Hawaiian standards: 5 to 10 inches across the Big Island, with isolated amounts up to 15 inches over the windward and southeastern slopes. Eastern Maui was given 3 to 6 inches. Western Maui and the rest of the chain, 1 to 2. Independent forecasters put the general range a little lower, around 4 to 8 inches, with local peaks of 8 to 12 and an extreme upper end scenario near 24. 15 inches sounds small next to 43. Translate it, and it stops sounding small. 1 inch of rain falling on a single acre of ground is a little over 27,000 gallons of water. 15 inches on that same acre is roughly 400,000 gallons. Now multiply that across an entire mountain flank where the soil is already at capacity, where the channels are clogged, where 6 bridges are gone and the roads have holes in them. The water does not need to be historic. It needs to be more than the ground can hold, and the ground can hold nothing. The Weather Service put it plainly in the advisory language. This rainfall may produce life-threatening flooding and mudslides for the windward and southeast Big Island, especially in steep terrain and over areas affected recently by Lala. You can read the county's level of expectation in the small decisions it made ahead of time. Crews re-inspected drainage across the island, trimmed trees that were already weakened, secured loose equipment, and topped off emergency generators at both Hilo International and Kona International, where aircraft were tied down or relocated. In Hilo itself, the park and ride lot on Kamehameha Avenue was given a designated backup location further inland to be used if Kamehameha Avenue floods. That is not a contingency you write for a storm you expect to miss you. Kamehameha Avenue runs along Hilo Bay, in a city with a long and painful history of water arriving where it was not wanted, and moving a parking lot in advance is what it looks like when local officials have decided the forecast deserves to be believed. Before we go on, I want to hear from you on something. If you have ever lived through the second storm, the one that arrives while the first one's damage is still sitting in your yard, tell me where and tell me what the second one broke that the first one had left standing. That specific experience does not get covered much, and I read every comment on these. Now, the part of this story that most coverage is getting wrong, and I would rather you hear it here than believe a headline. Moch is not a hurricane. Moch did not hit Hawaii. Moch did not make landfall. Every version of this story you may have seen framed as a second hurricane striking the islands or the Big Island taking another direct hit is describing something that did not happen. The center of this storm stayed a couple of hundred miles offshore and then kept going west. The reason no watches or warnings were issued for any island is that the wind field never threatened land. A warning coordination meteorologist with the National Weather Service said it clearly at a press conference before the storm arrived. This is not the same as Lala. The track is farther south. The wind field is smaller. Second correction, and it matters just as much. A flood watch is not a report of flooding. It is a statement that conditions favor flash flooding within a defined window. As of the early hours of the 23rd, there were no confirmed Moch-related deaths, no confirmed structural damage, and no confirmed flooding in the official updates. That may change by the time you watch this, and it may change quickly, but nobody should be told that something has happened when what exists is a forecast that it could. Third, the 15-inch figure is an isolated maximum for the most exposed slopes. It is not what Hilo expects. Hilo's own outlook was closer to 2 to 6 inches. Quoting the peak number as the island-wide total is the single most common way this kind of forecast gets distorted. Here is why I am spending time on this instead of leaning into the scarier version. The honest version of this story is already alarming. An island with broken bridges, a severed highway, mud-filled homes, 8,000 dark households, and a 3-week wait for electricity is being rained on again, and the hazard threshold has collapsed. You do not need a fake hurricane to make that frightening. Adding one only makes it easier for people to stop believing the next warning, and on this island, the next warning is coming. So why is this happening twice in 7 days? That question has a real answer, and it is the largest force operating in the Pacific this year. Hawaii has always been protected by something most people never think about: cold water. Tropical systems tracking toward the islands normally cross a band of cooler ocean on the approach, lose their fuel supply, and fall apart before they arrive. That is the reason a state sitting in the middle of the Pacific has not taken a direct hurricane landfall since Iniki in 1992. The barrier is thermal, not geographic. This year, the barrier is not there. A strong El Niño is developing, one that forecasters have described as tracking toward potential superstatus, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration placing a 90% probability on it, reaching strong or very strong intensity through August, September, and October. On top of that, a multi-year marine heat wave has pushed sea surface temperatures in this part of the Pacific to roughly 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius above normal. That difference is small enough that your skin would not notice it in the water. In energy terms, it is enormous, and more importantly, the warmth extends downward. A storm churning the ocean beneath itself normally pulls up cold water and chokes on it. When the warm layer is deep, there is no cold water to pull. The seasonal outlook reflects that. Forecasters have said Hawaii should be prepared for as many as 13 cyclones in the region through November. The Central Pacific has already produced 3 systems that mattered to the state. Hurricane Fausto came first, passing about 285 miles north of Hilo at the end of July and sending high surf and rip currents into the islands without ever threatening land. Then Lala, whose eye came within 30 miles of South Point carrying 80-mile-per-hour winds, and who buried homes in Kaʻū under mud and opened graves at Nalehu, and now Moch. 3 systems, and the season still has more than 3 months to run. It is worth sitting with what that means against the long record. Hawaii has not taken a direct hurricane landfall since Iniki in 1992, more than 30 years ago, and Iniki remains the storm every emergency manager in the state measures against. Neither Lala nor Moch made landfall either. Both of them did damage anyway. If a storm that misses by 30 miles can destroy 6 bridges, and a storm that misses by 200 miles can force an emergency declaration, the honest conclusion is that the landfall question has been doing a lot of work in people's minds that it does not deserve. On a chain of steep volcanic islands, proximity is enough. And the statistical picture is stark. The lead hurricane season forecaster at the National Weather Service noted that in a typical year, one tropical cyclone passes within 300 nautical miles of Hawaii. One. With Moch, the state has now had twice its normal annual count, and he said a third is probable before the season ends. He described the past 2 weeks as very bizarre and attributed it to steering currents in the atmosphere lining up in a way that happens to AIM systems at Hawaii. Those currents can shift again quickly, which would give the state a reprieve. They have not shifted yet. Now, the thing I promised you at the start, while the Big Island is being rained on by its second tropical system in a week, with its roads broken and its power out, something else on that island is sitting inside an open forecast window, Kīlauea. Kīlauea has been erupting in episodes since the 23rd of December, 2024, from vents inside Halemaumau crater at the summit. The pattern is remarkably consistent. The volcano inflates as magma accumulates, then releases in a burst of lava fountaining that usually lasts under 12 hours, then pauses, then inflates again. There have been more than 50 of these pauses. Episode 53 began at about 3:45 in the afternoon on the 12th of August and ended abruptly at 1:23 in the morning on the 13th. 9.5 hours of continuous fountaining. The north vent threw lava to roughly 500 feet above the ground, which is not far off the height of the Washington Monument, and the plume above it reached around 18,000 feet above sea level, more than 3 miles up into the altitude band where regional jets cruise. Then it stopped. And the instant it stopped, the ground at the summit began to swell again, which is the signature that tells the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory another episode is coming. Deflationary steps in the tilt data over the past several days have followed the same sequence observed before every previous episode. Glow has been visible on the webcams overnight from the north and west vents. The observatory's daily update on the 23rd of August put the forecast window for episode 54 between the 24th and the 28th of August. That window opens today. The alert level is advisory, and the aviation color code is yellow, and I want to be precise about what that means. The volcano is not erupting right now, and the window is a probability range built from ground deformation models, not a scheduled start time. It could begin tonight. It could slip past the 28th. But here is the detail that shows you how seriously the island is treating the overlap. Hawaii County's emergency guidance for Moch includes a specific contingency for Kīlauea erupting during the storm. In that event, Highway 11 would be open only to area residents on the stretch between the entrance of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and Kaʻū. That is a plan written for a scenario in which a tropical system is dumping rain on a district with collapsed roads while a volcano begins fountaining a few miles up the slope. And it is worth noting that the observatory itself has been dealing with intermittent outages from storm-related power problems, which is what it looks like when the monitoring network and the hazard are being hit by the same weather. Access to Pāhala and Waiohinu and Nālahu along Highway 11 is already restricted to local traffic and disaster response only. So the road that would carry an evacuation is the same road that is already broken and already limited. Let me come back to one more claim making the rounds, because it is being repeated as though it settles something. You will see this double storm week described as a once-in-a-generation event, or once in 75 years, based on a real finding. Searching the federal records back to 1950, only one other occasion turns up where Hawaii was affected by 2 tropical storms or hurricanes inside a single week. That was 10 years ago. In 2016, Hurricane Madeline weakened to a tropical storm and brushed south of the Big Island at the end of August. And 2 days later, Hurricane Lester passed north of the chain, which means the annual probability works out to somewhere around 1.3%, or roughly 1 year in 77. And here is the trap. A 1 in 77 chance does not mean it happens on a schedule 77 years apart. It happened in 2016, and it is happening now, 10 years later, which is precisely how low probability events behave in the real world. They cluster, they arrive early, The label describes the odds in any single year, not a waiting period. And treating it as a waiting period is the same mistake people make with the phrase 100-year flood. And the honest framing on El Niño is similar. El Niño loaded the dice. It warmed the water, deepened the warm layer, and shifted the steering flow. It did not create Lala, and it did not steer Moch. No individual storm is caused by a climate pattern, and anyone telling you otherwise is skipping the part where the atmosphere still has to arrange itself day by day. What El Niño did was remove a defense, and defenses that are removed tend to stay removed for the length of the season. For anyone on the Big Island watching this, or anyone with family there, the practical picture is narrow and specific. The state's Department of Land and Natural Resources urged people to stay out of forested and coastal areas entirely because of flooding, rockfall, landslides, and vegetation that has already been loosened once. Slopes that survived Lala are not the same slopes they were 2 weeks ago. Roots have been undercut, soil structure has been broken, and a hillside that held last weekend can fail this weekend under less rain. The shelters are open in Nalahu, Pāhala, Pahoa, Kaʻū, Hilo, and Captain Cook. The two operating on generators are the Nalahu Elementary School gym and the Robert Herkes gym in Pāhala. People arriving are asked to bring their own food, water, bedding, and medication, and pets are welcome in carriers. There is a state emergency management call center open daily from 9 in the morning to 6 in the evening, and temporary housing assistance is available for people affected by both Lala and Moch. Officials have also asked residents to check on neighbors with mobility problems, which is not filler advice in a district where the roads that would carry a rescue vehicle are the roads that washed out. If you are away from the island and want to be genuinely useful, the most valuable thing you can do is stop amplifying the version of this story that says Hawaii got hit by a second hurricane. The people who live there need the next warning to be believed. So here is what to actually watch, and the dates are tight. The flood watch for the Big Island runs until 6 in the evening Hawaii time on Monday, the 24th of August. Whether it is extended, upgraded to a warning, or allowed to expire is the first real signal, and it will tell you within hours whether the saturated ground held or gave way. By Tuesday, forecasters expect Moch to lose its tropical structure and go post-tropical, which ends the rainfall threat from this system. Then the window for Kīlauea's episode 54 stays open through the 28th of August. Watch for the observatory switching from deflation back to a sharp inflationary signal, and watch the vent glow strengthen on the webcams. That is the sequence that has preceded every one of the last several episodes. Beyond that, the 8th of September is the date that matters most to the people who live in Kaʻū, because that is when the lights are supposed to come back on in Waiohinu, Nālehu, Punaluu, Pāhala, and Wood Valley. And the season itself runs to the end of November, with the lead federal forecaster on record saying a third close pass is probable while the warm water and the steering pattern hold. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because we are going to be back on this island the moment either of two things happens. The moment episode 54 starts fountaining, or the moment the fourth Central Pacific system of this season gets a name. Given what the water temperature is doing out there, I would not plan on waiting long for either one.